Step into your future with an all-new series, Star Trek Starfleet Academy.
Being a cadet means being open to the people around you.
I've spent my whole life getting away from stuff, letting someone in. It's hard.
I want to be captain. I need to be captain.
Holly Hunter and Paul Giamatti star.
You'll encounter challenges your predecessors never had to imagine.
Starfleet Academy. New series streaming January 15th on Paramount Plus.
You see those three women, they have a cartoonish look to them, the way they're made up and the costuming. I think it's like a mixture of everyone, but I think you can really point to Kenny Ortega as sort of taking those three characters who were in the script originally and sort of toning down the horror and making it more comedy. I mean, I definitely know people who are like, when I was a kid, I was very scared of that movie. And I do think it's, Hocus Pocus, a lot of people brought up to me that they were like, oh, that was sort of my gateway to horror. Like that was how I got into horror movies. And I think that's probably true of myself, that little bit of spookiness to it probably led me, towards more harder horror movies.
Before listening to today's exciting episode, I just want to introduce myself. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby. I am the host of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, an arts and culture podcast. I'm so excited that you're listening or watching. Please make sure that you follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're getting the podcast. Please review us. Please share the podcast. It really means a lot. The more exposure the podcast has, the more I can book exciting guests. There's a Patreon. Ad-free episodes are on the Patreon. I also release bonus content on there. I talk about our book club, which is free. We're discussing on February 1st, Wuthering Heights, in honor of the Emerald Fennell adaptation that's coming out. So if you want to join the book club, it's on Zoom. It's at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just message me. I'll send you the Zoom link. Please make sure you're also following us on social media. We have a new TikTok account. It's Dr.Andrew Long story short, I think TikTok could not handle the spicy queer male content that I was putting out there. So I had to create a new TikTok. I'm going to be extra careful now. Trust me. Also, Instagram, Facebook, Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I'll see you on there. And now, here's today's exciting episode. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby for another exciting Ivory Tower Boiler Room podcast episode, talking about probably my favorite movie, at least my favorite Gothic Halloween film, Hocus Pocus. So Shannon Carlin, who's joining me here, is a pop culture journalist, which you would love what I'm doing with my writing students. They all had to choose a pop culture topic, and they're writing an ethnography essay on it. But none of them chose Hocus Pocus, but maybe in the future. Her work has appeared in Time, Vulture, Pitchfork, and Bustle. She was born and raised in Ronkonkoma on Long Island, and it's on Long Island, not in Long Island. I was there for 10 years, so we've been chatting about that. She now lives in Brooklyn with her husband, and this is her first book, which is called Witches Run Amok, Hocus Pocus, The Oral History. So, such a beautiful book. The cover, of course, the infamous film poster. So welcome to the podcast, Shannon.
Hi, yeah, it's so nice to be here. I also will put a little fun fact about the cover, that it is the first book from Disney that includes an actual image from the movie, which was a whole thing to get it, and I find it to be really special that it is that you can, like, usually it's an illustration or which is beautiful, but it was very cool to be able to be like, oh, we got a photo. And
I'm assuming that having Disney as a logo was really important with the title.
Yeah, I mean, I think, they like to think of it as Disney's Hocus Pocus. It's not just Hocus Pocus, it's Disney's Hocus Pocus, which was something cool, like you said, to have the logo, to have some of the posters. But it is funny because even the official Disney publishing company can't always get access to images, because there's anyone who knows about copyright can be really difficult to get images from the 90s or before because of the way the contracts were. So, it was kind of a special thing, but you think, oh yeah, of course, it's Disney. They can get these images, and you realize how difficult it is. You're like I was more impressed by having it on the cover once I knew the whole saga of how you get those images.
Well, that brings up an interesting question, which, as I was preparing some talking points, I didn't think about, but, you know, in your oral history projects, and if you want to let everyone know, how many interviews, how many years did this Hocus Pocus project take you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was trying to figure out the time because I feel like many projects, when you work on them, you're sort of in and out, or you're working really hard for a few months and then you maybe take a little break and then you go to it. I think overall it was like 2.5 years, 2 years in change. By the end of it, I had spoken to about 100 people, maybe a little more. Not everyone is quoted in the book, for people who know a little something about journalism. And, sometimes people don't want to be quoted, but you interview them, talk to them on background, and they can give you really helpful information and kind of help you fact check, but maybe don't want to be quoted directly. So, at the end of the day, I think I spoke to about 100 people
Wow.
for the book. Yeah, over that period of time, and some people talking to them numerous times, emailing them to fact check things, or to, if someone told a story about someone, I like to go and check in with them to sort of give them the heads up that someone said this about them. Most of it was very nice stuff, but especially if it was something that maybe was on the line of being a little negative, I wanted to give people a heads up and give them a chance to, respond and sort of say their piece too and understand what people were saying. So, by the time you're done with that, you interview some people 2, 3 times, so you do a lot of interviews, and you have so much material by the end. So it is like an undertaking when you're done. You're so happy to have done all the interviews, but you're also like, oh my gosh, why did I do all of these interviews? I have to go through all of them now and try to pick things out.
Well, so 1993, right? The summer of 1993, you bring us
Yeah.
into July 1993, which I know you get into the whole history about why it was a summer film and not a Halloween film, which,
Yeah.
you know, like, why was that? Why would this be a summer release? Like, because
Yeah.
now that would never happen,
Oh, yeah. I
really.
mean, that's the funny part. It's like now, of course, it would be around Halloween. It would be September, it would be October, to make sure you get the season. But now I think it's hard to imagine, even back then in the 90s, how like Halloween was not a month-long seasonal thing. It was just kind of the day. And at that point in time, these production companies, these studios, they were just like, you put some, if it's supposed to be a big hit, you put it out in the holidays or you put it out in the summer. And so it was actually a good thing that they wanted to put out Hocus Pocus in July, even though it sounds ridiculous. And I think we can all argue that maybe people in July didn't want to talk about Halloween, didn't want to be with the witches, but it was a good thing for them to do that. But that was mostly just because of how the release schedule was. It was so much smaller, it was so much, if you came out around Halloween, it probably seemed like, oh, that's not a good release time. Even if it was a Halloween movie, the idea that it was going to be a big project, it's got Bette Midler, it should be in the summer, it should be a summer blockbuster. But I think like we all, like you said, now you're like, why would it ever come out in July? Why would we, we'd want it when it's fall. You want to feel the actual spooky season. It doesn't feel, it would take you out, I think, now to see that released in summer. And I think if it was released in summer now, we'd be like, what's wrong with this movie? Like that can't be a good sign. But at the time, that was the prime choice spot, especially for a Disney movie to be released in the summer. So I think it's easy to think, oh, why would they do that? But, even talking to some of the people, especially at the studio level, I think, I had a quote from Jeffrey Katzenberg that said, who was like the head of the studio at that time, saying, oh, this was a good thing. Like, we thought this was going to be a big hit. We put it out in the summer because it's going to be a blockbuster. So it's funny to think of it now and it seems so ridiculous. And all of them sort of admitted, they were like, it's ridiculous that we released this in the summer. But at the time, it seemed that was a great idea. That was the smartest way to pitch this movie.
And there's such an early history that you provide that it's not like this film came out of nowhere. It's not like it happened in a year. Like, isn't it true that you bring in, I want to say David Kirshner, right? Who
Yeah.
David Kirshner was the creator, the writer, and the producer of Hocus Pocus.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he actually didn't envision Bette Midler. Wasn't there actually someone in the late 80s who he saw as Winifred Sanderson?
Yeah, it's really funny because I think now, right, you can't imagine anyone else. You think, of course, they would go to her. She's a Disney star. She's making Disney movies at that point. She's making adult Disney movies, but she's making Disney movies, so she's in the studio system for them. Of course, they're gonna. She's a huge hit. She's a huge star. His actual idea was Cloris Leachman because of Young Frankenstein, he was like, she would be perfect for this, and sort of admits to me, and I think to other people when they've talked about this, I don't think the studio thought she was going to bring in the dollars, so she was really never considered. But in his mind, that's who he envisioned when he was writing it, when he was thinking of it. And like you said, this was also in the 80s. This was earlier, so she was a little younger. Maybe it was closer to the time of Young Frankenstein, so maybe to him it made a little more sense, and Bet maybe was too young at that point, sort of thinking about it. But yeah, that was his idea, which I always thought was funny because I don't know about you, but I grew up loving the Mary-Kate and Ashley movie Double Double.
Yes, I was going to mention that. I'm like, isn't it interesting that she plays a witch eventually in that film?
Yeah, I was like, he had something. He was onto something because someone else also agreed she could play a good witch and a bad witch. So I do think he was onto something, even though it seems like, oh, I could never imagine that now. I'm sure she would have been great. It would have been a very different performance. And I think once Kenny Ortega came into it, I don't know that Cloris Leachman would have been the right choice because he's so musical. I feel like he would have needed more of like a diva singer than maybe Cloris Leachman could have. I think the Cloris Leachman version would have been very funny, I'm sure, but yeah, I don't think it would have been right with where the movie eventually goes.
Yeah. Was this Kenny Ortega's first directing debut with Disney, or had he done directing before?
He had actually directed Newsies.
Oh,
not that
that's
much.
right.
Yeah, right. Not that long before. I feel like they're, right around the same time. And some of the stuff that people talk about in the book was sort of the pressure on Kenny Ortega because he had Newsies. This was a big musical, now a cult classic as well, became a Broadway musical. We all think of that as being, if you're of a certain age, I think that's kind of like a seminal movie now, a seminal
Christian
musical.
Bale.
Yeah, it was like Christian Bale. There's just Bill Pullman, all these people that you're sort of like, the names of. And, he had made that and that also didn't do well at the box office. So there was pressure on him when he was doing Hocus Pocus to be like, oh, they're going to give him another kind of big budget movie. Can he do this? So there was like a little pressure. And then obviously this movie didn't do very well either. So it is interesting to think that he's had two movies in Newsies and Hocus Pocus that have come back in this huge way. We don't think of them as being movies that didn't succeed, but they were both kind of, I don't want to go as far to say a failure in the beginning, but they obviously didn't perform in the ways he wanted or the studio wanted. And there is something kind of fascinating about them giving him a second chance to do Hocus Pocus, because there's a lot of people, or now, if you fail on a big movie, they might say, oh, yeah, I don't think, not that they put you in director jail so much, but maybe they wouldn't want to give you another project of that caliber. And I do think there's something interesting about Disney saying, no, I think we've got something here. Maybe it didn't work there, but let's try again. So I do think there's something kind of cool about that he kind of got a second chance to do it. And I think when you watch those movies, right, you can see his style. Like he has such a unique style. It's so musical, it's so rhythmic that I feel like I can understand why someone would be interested in seeing him do more big budget movies where he can kind of have that scope. But yeah, I feel like the idea that the film before was also didn't do so well is sort of, I don't know, it adds to the lore, I think, of also Kenny Ortega.
Well, and we grew up with High School Musical, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that a
yeah.
Kenny Ortega film?
Yeah. And I
That's
feel like
fascinating.
that, right? When you think of that and you think of Newsies and you think of Hocus Pocus, at once they're all pretty different, but at the same time, you're like, you can see that Kenny Ortega sort of the bright colors, this beautiful sort of candy colored kind of fantastical, but in the real world, but fantastical kind of world. I mean, obviously Hocus Pocus is fantastical, but I feel like Newsies and High School Musical, they are set in a real world that feels pitched up. It doesn't feel quite like our world, but something a little more magical.
So, from your interviews, what did you learn about the Sanderson sisters, the trio? Was this a concept that had been envisioned even before the film was Hocus Pocus? Like, I know it originally wasn't Hocus Pocus, and they were like kind of playing around with a different script idea, but like, were the sisters always central to the script?
My understanding is that they were always pretty central, but like the actual vision of them was so different because it definitely started off very dark or much darker than the version we had. There wasn't as much comedy. There was more of a scary, these were scary witches. These weren't as colorful and fun and funny and campy. That sort of came in once Kenny Ortega came on, and he sort of added that sort of humor to it. And I think also the casting, right? You see those three women, they have a cartoonish look to them, the way they're made up and the costuming. I think it's like a mixture of everyone, but I think you can really point to Kenny Ortega as sort of taking those three characters who were in the script originally and sort of toning down the horror and making it more comedy. I mean, I definitely know people who are like, when I was a kid, I was very scared of that movie. And I do think it's, Hocus Pocus, a lot of people brought up to me that they were like, oh, that was sort of my gateway to horror. Like that was how I got into horror movies. And I think that's probably true of myself, that little bit of spookiness to it probably led me, towards more harder horror movies.
This holiday season, I'm so excited to talk about my favorite academic publisher, Broadview Press. Broadview Press has just incredible anthologies, classic books, history of literature, philosophy, you name it in the humanities, Broadview Press has you covered. So I've had guests on here like Dr. Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock to talk about his pop culture for beginners book, his Mad Scientist Guide to Composition. He's an incredible horror gothic literary scholar. So definitely listen to the podcast I did with him. I had a vampire literature discussion, a wonderful Wizard of Oz conversation. So always so many exciting Broadview Press guests that I have on, and I have a few new episodes coming out soon this holiday season all about how to teach writing and composition. So look out for them. And there's a few books that I definitely want to highlight. So make sure you have on your radar Broadview Press's new anthology of science fiction, a book about original inquiry, a guide to research for undergraduates. I mean, when I'm teaching my students the research essay, definitely I could use that book. Good Reasoning Matters, a guide to critical thinking in a digital age. Okay, well, I hope to talk to all of these editors, but yes, we definitely need critical thinking in this digital age. I keep saying we need to have courses in college for social media literacy to understand what is going on these apps. So that's called Good Reasoning Matters. And then the last book is Solving the Puzzle, A Student's Guide to Historical Research and Writing. These are all incredible books to assign your students, specifically in any kind of literary or humanities research-based course, which almost every humanities course now is research-based. Also, Broadview Press is interested in hearing from librarians. So if you're a librarian or you know a librarian, please take down this information. There is a new subscription called Broadview Digital Bookshelves, which gives you access to over 450 critical editions of literary classics from Beowulf to Virginia Woolf, all for one affordable price. Again, that's over 450 editions of literary classics. Go to ebooks at broadviewpress.com. So if you're even just a classic literature lover, check out Broadview Digital Bookshelves. Okay, I hope you all enjoy Broadview Press, and I have a 20% off code for you all. It is Ivory Tower. Write Ivory Tower at the checkout, and you will receive 20% off all Broadview Press orders.
But I think, yeah, the sort of fun and candy-coated kind of element of the witches, I think we can really like chalk that up to Kenny Ortega and just sort of his vision. But they were always there. They were always in the movie. And I think, there was a lot of changes to the script. There was a lot of writers on the script. They talked about how there was probably 7, 8 writers who worked on this script. And in the end, only 2 are credited. And that's how Hollywood works, right? But the first version to the final version, I mean, it's very hard to find the original version of the script. No one seems to have it, but everyone describes it as being way scarier, way creepier, way more horror, probably not the Disney kids movie that we would expect. And I think when we watch Hocus Pocus now, we think, oh, this is scarier than a lot of Disney movies now. But I feel like it was way more pitched up and way I think it was more like the Witches, Roald Dahl. It had a little more
Yeah.
of that than the comedy and bright colors and all of that. So I think, it's just the changes that came. But the witches were always there and pretty central to the story, which I think when you watch it, you're like, well, of course, right? They've got to be, they're too good. Even if they were scary, you'd still want to see them, I think.
Yeah, well, Angelica Houston, she is queer diva,
Yeah.
but she is frightening and powerful and, she holds no punches about
Oh,
harming the children.
yeah. I
And
was gonna
her
say,
like diabolical, actually very dictator. It's like a dictatorial, authoritarian witch.
yeah, yeah. She
And yeah.
feels like you said that like we don't really get into that. Even as, mean as Winnie can get, it's mostly like you hear her talking about all these things she's gonna do, these kids. You don't really see it, and maybe the meanest she is really to her sisters, which, that's she's still not very nice to them. But yeah, like you said, it's nothing like Angelica Houston, and obviously like even the old age makeup in Hocus Pocus is nowhere near as creepy as the witches, which to me, like you said, that was horror for kids. That
Yeah.
was that
That Jim
was
Henson puppetry is, I mean,
yes.
fabulous. It's
Yeah, yeah.
so frightening. But wait, what was the film originally called?
I think it was called, let me just double check this because I don't want to
No, no,
say the
it's
wrong
okay.
name, but I'm pretty sure it was the Halloween House. Um,
Yes, yes.
and
Yeah.
yeah, which was like I had to fact check that so many times in the book itself. I was always afraid I was saying the wrong thing. But I think it was more, which is funny because I do think that like even in the versions that people talked about, the house itself didn't seem like it was such I think like that title would have been misleading. It doesn't feel like the house is really
Hmm.
like enough of the story. So I do think it was a good thing that they changed the title. The funny part about it is like if you read the book, you'll never hear anyone explain how they got to the title. And this is because I could not find anyone who would tell me how they got there. It was very much like, oh, someone came up with it. And then I'd say, oh, who came up with it? And someone would tell me a name and I'd go to that person and say, hey, this person told me that. And they were like, oh, no, it wasn't me. It was someone else, which I think is fascinating because usually in Hollywood, right, everyone wants to take credit for stuff. No one wants to take credit for naming this movie, which I feel like is some of the best parts of the movie. The title is just so good. Someone was just like, it was a line in the script and we just decided that, but no one will admit who wrote that line and who came up with it. So I don't know. I hope one day someone else will figure this out, but I did talk to a lot of people and no one seemed to know the background of that.
Yeah. Well, and of course the illusion from Winifred Sanderson's It's Just a Bunch of Hocus Pocus. Like I wonder
Yeah.
if Bette Midler herself just, said that line or it was in the script and
Yeah.
then it stuck.
Yeah.
I mean, but yes, I can't think of the film without the iconic lines of Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker's, Amuck, Amuck, Amuck,
Yeah.
Kathy Najimy's comedy. So, definitely am curious. I saw there's so much extensive conversations you've had with Vanessa Shaw, Omri Katz, Tobias, is it Jelinek?
That's how I pronounce it. And I
Okay,
hope I've been
okay.
pronouncing it right.
Okay. Thora Birch.
Yeah.
And, the three that I didn't find were the sisters.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, I'm assuming it's because of schedules or
Yeah.
they're just hard to sometimes reach because of publicity purposes.
Yeah, I unfortunately couldn't get them to speak to me for this book. Like, I hope we want to release a paperback at some point. I would love to reach back out to them and try to get something from them. Their voices are in the movie. They are in the book because
Mhm.
we did use prior quotes because we all know they've talked about this movie a lot. And to be fair to them, I can understand that they're like, I've talked about this movie a lot. Like maybe I don't need to talk anymore about it now. But I hope they change their mind at some point and maybe want to talk to me because I obviously have a lot of questions that even just came up during my interviews with other people where I wanted to fact check. And I did send emails to their publicist to try to say, hey, would they mind to answer this or maybe follow up on this? And, unfortunately, like you said, scheduling, different things happen. You don't always get everyone. It's always a little bit of a bummer, right? When you don't get, but I was lucky enough to get all of the kids who, are in the film and get Doug Jones and
Oh,
get
yes.
so many people who worked on it. So, I don't want it to seem like, oh, I'm bummed that I didn't get to talk to three people when you
Yeah.
spoke to all these other people. But obviously, you want to get as many voices as you can and try to get as many stories as you can. Some of it was fun to also just hear about those people through the lens of everyone else, because so many of the people joined the movie because of Bette Midler. They wanted to be in the movie because she was there and she was a part of it. And by all accounts, everyone was like, she believed in this so much, and she was
Mm.
so, present and in the role. She was working really hard even behind the scenes as more of a producer on it too. So it was very fascinating to hear from the outside what it was like to watch her, to watch her sort of perform and sort of put this all together.
So, what were some of the interesting memories, like specifically the children? I can imagine like they're the ones who are with the Sanderson sisters the most. Like, I mean, outside of this, each sister,
Yeah.
that it must have been really interesting to be with Bette Midler and the way that her comic chops. And I had on a Bette Midler um historian, I'll say.
Yeah.
He wrote this book called On Bette Midler. His name's Kevin Winkler, and he was saying how a lot of her films, um, basically, they just demonstrate the versatility of her triple threat performance.
Yeah.
That she's not a person who can be cast in certain films because she is such a big personality.
Yeah.
And like this film really showcases all her aspects. So it kind of makes
Yeah.
sense how much
Yeah.
she was invested in the performance.
Yeah.
But like, what was she like with? I mean, Thora Birch was so young, but then you did have like
Yeah.
high school age
Yeah.
um actors. How was she on set with them?
I think the thing about it is obviously they were pretty young. So there was a lot of like, we shoot for a little bit and then the adults have to come in and shoot because, labor laws and school and all of these different things. So they were sort of like, we didn't spend as much time with them. Some of the reason why there's so many scenes of like the witches on their own and then the kids is honestly due to scheduling and sort of
Mm.
the way you work with child actors, right? So I think they felt like when they would have scenes with them, it was very special. And it was like you had to come ready to perform because you didn't want to mess anything up and you didn't want to keep them there longer. And so I think they felt like a pride in their performance, but also a little bit in awe, like you said, of like Bet. And I think everyone, the like between Sarah Jessica Parker and Kathy Najimy, who were newer, they still, I think, were like in awe of them because some of them talked about how they were like, oh, they knew that Sarah Jessica Parker was in Annie, or they had seen Sister Act, and they knew Kathy
Mm.
Najimy and just found them to be so funny. So I think, there was that level of, okay, we gotta be ready to perform for Bet. We don't want to mess up in front of her. I mean, there's some really fun stories about like some of the experiences they had with them. I think Thora, gets to have that big moment at the end where she's sort of scooped up by Bette Midler and she
Yeah.
talks about how, doing the flying sequence, how she got hit with like the broom or something, and how, Bette Midler felt so bad and she had to sort of be like, I'm fine. And she talked about how there was, there's a lot about how the filming of this is very practical, right? So the flying sequences could take a really long time and they were in very uncomfortable harnesses. And I
Mm.
think the setups, would kind of I don't know, bring people down a little bit, the long hours, long days. And she tells a story about, and I've heard her tell this before, but it's in the book. Thora Birch talked about how she was like, Bette Midler seemed to know that like the cast and crew needed a little pick me up, so she just started singing "Wind Beneath My Wings," like she's on a broom and she's just belting it out. And she said like the whole set just kind of went quiet and she just sang and then they kind of went on and kept filming. But she was like, it really meant so much. But she's like, I do feel like it gave us this little burst of life. And I think there's a lot of stories like that where it's like she knew how to keep the set in check, and she kind of, I think her gravitas and her ability to know, okay, we need a little something because she's done this before and know working with kids. So I think there was just a lot of great stories about sort of Bet, the, rah rah, sort of the cheerleader
Mhm.
on set, very serious about her work, wasn't maybe hanging out with everyone because she was very busy, but like just great stories about how committed she was to making it a good experience for everyone, maybe specifically these young actors who, for most of them, this is, their first big role. So I think there's some really nice stuff about sort of who she was, kind of what she's like on set, which I think was such a great behind the scenes. I mean, I don't think any of us would question her being a real professional, but I think it's more of the specific stories about what it was like.
And Bet isn't, or I should say, it's not the first time that she's been part of a project that wasn't successful right away. I mean, she
Yeah.
started in the bathhouses in Manhattan and like constantly was always reinventing herself, had
Yeah.
her like queer community supporting her. And I feel like the way that she probably saw it gaining a cult following made sense to her because she is a cult campy figure herself.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
did you have anyone who talked with you about being disappointed or maybe not really being excited to talk about their involvement with Hocus Pocus when it wasn't the cult campy iconic
Yeah.
classic it is now and how they
Oh,
dealt with
yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of that. I think especially, that's like a sensitive question, right? To ask a bunch of, they're all now older, but they were young when this happened. And like you said, it took time for this movie to find an audience. So there was that 10, 15 year, where this movie was kind of, what was it? It was a movie that people maybe watched, but no one was talking about it. The internet wasn't obviously out there to really let people know how connected we were all to this movie. And a lot of them talked about that, where they were like, immediately making the movie was such a great experience. And they were sort of being told often that, this is going to be a big hit. This is a Disney movie. You've got Bet, you've got, I think they were preparing for this to be like, this could be life-changing. This could be a life-changing movie for them. And I think, they wanted to believe it because they had such a great time and they saw all the care and the, skill that was, and the creativity to this movie. And I don't think anyone really could fathom it maybe doing as poorly as it did at the box office, and maybe, having a pretty low critical approval, right? It didn't do well at the box office, but it also didn't really get good reviews. And so a lot of the kids, Thora Birch and some of the other actors, talked about what it was like, where it was really disappointing, and it really felt like, what do you do next? And these are young actors, right? But what do you do next? And how do you move on from this? And the disappointment of that. I think Tobias Jelinek sort of talks about how, he went to an acting class shortly after the movie came out. And, his plan, I think, when he went to that acting class was to be able to be like, I was in Hocus Pocus with Bette Midler. And he said he went in there and no one knew the movie, no one knew what this was, and sort of feeling disappointed, that it was just like, oh, okay, like that's it, that's sort of it. And I don't think any of them could have really thought about the life it would have, because it just felt like, okay, on to the next one, it's disappointing, let's move on. So I think for them too, it's like, it's such a special thing that it's come back in this way, because I don't think they really thought it was going to have a life of its own and
Mm.
become this phenomenon. So I think it's been, talking to them, I think if I would have been doing this book, 10 years ago, I don't know that all of them would have wanted to speak to me, because it might have been a little too hard to talk about this experience. But I think now that everything is sort of coming up roses for them, and it's such a great experience, they were way more willing to maybe talk about the downside and some of the bad stuff that came from the movie not succeeding, than they would have been. I think Omri Katz specifically, like, he doesn't really, he doesn't make movies anymore, and hadn't for a long time, and sort of had not really talked about the movie because I think he wanted to sort of separate himself from that. And only in recent years, in a few years before I started this book, did he really start talking about it or doing appearances, and now he's 10 toes down, at these different events and different fan conventions, really celebrating it. So I think there is something really special about that. But I think you're right. It was not easy. And I think it's easy now to look back and talk about what it was like and maybe be able to really express all the bad parts of a movie not doing well, especially when you're that age. But I think now it's like, okay, we had to deal with that disappointment, but now, what we have now, I mean, I think they take the disappointment for what they have now.
Yeah, they're very, very, I'm sure, pleased and grateful for this
Yeah.
cult classic.
Yeah.
And it really does feel like it has this legacy now that matches Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah.
And I wonder, did any of them talk about like the campy or specifically the queer audience? Like what it means for it to really resonate with the
Yeah.
LGBTQ demographic? Like, do they, I know it's hard when you're an artist and so attached to a film to have a type of
Yeah.
analysis that's, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
separate from your work in it. But, what do they think about the way that it's just hit the queer community and registered with them?
Yeah, like you said, especially the drag community. And
Mm.
I think, like you said, I'm so happy we're bringing this up because this movie really would not be what it is without, the queer community, the drag community, sort of understanding this movie before anyone else, including Disney, knew what this was. In the years where it was sort of in the shadows, like that's where you'd find it. You'd find drag queens lip syncing to the movie, to I Put a Spell on You. So I do think like without them, this movie does not have the appeal, or it doesn't have it's not the phenomenon it is. So I do think that's like first and foremost. And I think a lot of the people in the movie totally understand that. They know. I think David Kirshner was maybe one of the first people I spoke to and was one of the first to, without me even asking, to say, I have loved like the drag brunches, the drag performances, the drag shows that have like used the Sanderson sisters, specifically
Mm.
Bette, Winnie, and made these amazing performances and really brought it into this other world. And I don't know if a lot of them could, they were young, so I don't know about the camp that if they understood it at the time, but I think they obviously all understand now the camp appeal to it. And I think also too, right? Like at the time, I don't know. Obviously, Kenny Ortega is a gay filmmaker, an
Mhm.
out filmmaker. But I think in the moment at that time, working for Disney in that era, I don't know that he was talking about that. But now obviously he talks about how drag was clearly an inspiration for how he saw the witches, and I think it's hard not to see that now. And maybe it's a little bit of the chicken or the egg because we've seen drag performances, so it's hard not to see it in their performances. But I think the women have also admitted that, like you said, obviously they are gay icons in their own right. Bette has done so much over the course of her career. It doesn't surprise anyone to think that they were inspired by their queer friends, their queer artist friends, creative friends, drag. But I think all of them sort of understand that and are so excited that that's a part of the lore of the movie and of like now that it's like they are together. Those things you can't really have one without the other. And that was like really important in the book too, to make sure that there is a chapter dedicated to, the LGBTQ plus community who really like made this movie what it is. I mean, there were so many people I spoke to who talked about how this movie sort of was a queer awakening, even though there's no queer characters in it. It felt like they could see themselves in it, even though, and we're talking about again at a time where it was very hard, right, to see yourself in things that you weren't there, and maybe movies were not. So to find yourself in something means so much, and I think that's like such a special part of the movie that there were people who were like, I definitely watched this movie and like knew there was something about this that I connected with that maybe I didn't have put my finger on at the time, but as I got older, totally understood it. And I think that's such a special thing and such a wonderful part of the movie that it really resonated with people who maybe at the time were looking for something and weren't finding it, especially in kids movies or Disney movies, and found it in this. And I think that's such a special part of it.
Yeah, well, I have to talk about the adult subtext, which is the
Yeah.
obsession that Danny has with her brother being a virgin and
Yes.
just
Yes.
virginity in general. And the way that I feel this film, that atmosphere of Salem, like Salem is so essential. The
Yeah.
scenery, the filming in Pioneer Village
Yeah.
and the way that it really becomes its own character. But it's so interesting, Shannon, that it's not Christianity, it's this virginity, like the
Yeah.
sexuality concept. Like, what
Yeah.
did those you talked with, did anyone like get into filming in Salem or even these more adult themes around sensuality or sexuality?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the funny part about this movie is Salem, right? You cannot watch this movie and not think of Salem. People go to Salem to see the different sites, but the majority of this movie was filmed on a soundstage in California. But those, like you said, that it really added something to have them, even just those few scenes where they're filming in Salem, where you can see, like you said, Pioneer Village, you can see these different homes, you can see the town hall, the outside of the town hall, even if the inside is someplace in California, some venue there. I think
Mm.
there's something special about that it really brings, like you said, I think it makes it feel real. We see these sites, we can feel that it feels like an East Coast movie. I think the themes of it, like you said, everyone, I don't know that at the time, I think at the time most of them were like, this is a little weird. I think like Thora Birch was talking about how she's reading the script as a kid and she was like, "Oh, I didn't find it as weird because maybe my parents were like a little more liberal progressive that I was like experiencing they were talking about this. It wasn't something that I wasn't talking about. But I think the rest of them were just sort of like, yeah, it was sort of now thinking of how much virginity adults are talking to teenagers about virginity in a way that, like you said, it's not necessarily like keep your virginity. It's almost like, why are you still a virgin? Which feels like that's something very weird and interesting because, like you said, it's not Christianity where it's like purity, though there's an element of that. It's more about like, I can't believe this kid is still a virgin, which feels kind of crazy now to imagine being like this 15-year-old kid. Why is he still a virgin? And that it's a joke, that it's just like the overwhelming joke of the movie is, oh, he lit the candle. He's a virgin. He brought them back. He's the problem because he's a virgin. It is very weird. And I think everyone I spoke to was like, it is weird. Like no one was like, I love it. I wish there was more virginity in the movie. I think most people were just sort of like, yeah, I don't know why it's in there so much. I know that like the writer of it was sort of like, that wasn't really my idea. Like I don't know that I love this joke of it. So I think it's like a weird thing where it's like it's very much a time capsule of a different time because I think even 3 years late, 2 years later, I think we would have been right in a society that I don't think that would have worked either. So it's weird that like it's a very weird moment in time where like somehow that got through.
Yeah.
Everyone just laughed and everyone we all moved on. But yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously funny too, right? Like the sequel, Hocus Pocus 2, like they make a joke out of it and it is not a mention because that just doesn't fly to talk about that with anyone. I don't think anyone wants to, whatever side of the aisle, whatever side of your political or religious beliefs, I don't think anyone thinks that's like a good joke. So obviously that's like sort of been removed, but and made into its own joke. But yeah, there's definitely like there's a lot of stuff in the book of people talking about like why they think it's in the movie, what it really represents, and some people's like sort of deeper dive into like virginity and the gods, like so there was a lot of people gave me some really interesting stuff that was like less about the idea of like isn't it weird that virginity's in there, but like really thinking about like virginity in these kinds of in a more ancient way, like what it means to be a virgin.
That's what I was going to bring up because I
Yeah.
feel that even from the opening, I always like I've used the opening in my literary analysis
Yeah.
with students, and the way
Yeah.
that it's this frame narrative where Hocus Pocus is actually the book,
Yeah.
and then it opens, and then you see back in the Puritan time, almost like, framing this fictional idea of, oh, we're opening the bedtime story. Like this is our
Yeah.
goth. It may be freezing here in the Northeast, but when I received my copy of the Gay and Lesbian Review, it warmed me up instantly. Their new issue is all about kink culture. Let me explain a little. I'm going to read what Jeremy C. Fox, the managing editor, has to say about this issue. He says this issue marks a bit of a departure for the Gay and Lesbian Review as we crack open the bedroom door to explore the practices and paraphilias that interest or obsess some LGBT people and the roots of their appeal. Several future articles delve deeply into why certain kinks turn some of us on, and whether we can discern historical and aesthetic rationales behind these fixations. This magazine features articles such as The Power of the Foot. Oh, yeah. They're going there with foot kinks. Maplethorpe's Gift to America, Reclaiming the Sacred Dungeon. Tumblr was a gateway to kink, and Cruising with Boyd McDonnell. You definitely want to get your hands on the kink issue here. I have an exclusive promo code that those at the Gay and Lesbian Review have granted to you all. It is ITBR Choice. Enter it when you check out on the glreview.org. And you will get a free issue of the magazine. I hope you all enjoy your reading, and it'll definitely keep you nice and cozy. Story, and I think it works so well.
Yeah.
But it's also so interesting because I also kind of wonder, is there a subverting going on with the Christian Puritan? I'm an American literature scholar, so 19th century American literature is full of, Young Goodman Brown, The Scarlet Letter, and it really takes it on its head, and it's not rooted in like the devil appears as the comical moment with them thinking that they're meeting the devil, the Sanderson sisters. But also, did anyone talk about like the presence of even is there an element of a Jewish Gothic tale being told? And the reason I just bring that up is because, there really is, I feel, an interesting presence with the cast and creative team. A lot of them are Jewish, and wondering, was there any kind of thinking around that? Maybe, is there a reason why it's not really seeped in Christian doctrine?
I honestly think that's probably just more to do with sort of the studio being we don't want to get too specific because we want this to be appealing to everyone. And if we start to get into, and which is kind of interesting to think of now, because maybe people, like you said, maybe would lean more one way or the other because they would say that's actually, maybe we're going to get that audience, But I think because they were in the real, we want everyone to see this movie. I think there's something, and I did talk to someone who wrote a book about sort of Disney and religion and sort of this idea that, Disney's never really specific about religion. It's very sort of choose your own adventure. If you are Jewish, maybe you see something in it. If you are Christian, if you are Muslim, maybe you see something, but they never totally barrel down on it. And I think that's more of a business decision than anything else. But it's definitely an interesting thing because I think, like you said, there is definitely someone who can write a thesis on sort of the religion, like you said, the sort of Christian nods, but is it how much is it really in this movie? I think there's something very interesting about it. And I guess, like you said, just the witches in general, Puritan, you could definitely write, there's something to be written about it. I don't think anyone I really spoke to talked too much about it. And I think that's mostly because I don't know how religious some of the people are. So I don't know if they saw it in it, I know that Larry Bagby, who plays Ice, he was quite religious. He was Mormon at the time and practicing and does talk about how he had to shave ice into his head and he had to go to church with his parents and people thought something is wrong with this kid and that he was oh, I was sort of the talk of the town because everyone was what's going on with him? He looks like he might be going in a bad direction because look at him, he's got this shaved into his head. So I do think there's something funny, like you said, about the idea of this movie kind of skirting the line of religion, but one of the actors actually in it is sort of talking about how he was oh, people were not maybe into my haircut in this movie while I was out and about because I didn't realize I was making a movie. So I guess there's ties to it,
Yeah, well, and I feel that Sarah Sanderson, I mean, I've always just been fascinated by Sarah Jessica Parker's acting in it because I think it's rare that she is that comedic. It's rare to see her in that campy kind
such
of
a physical
yes.
comedy too.
Yeah. Yeah. Did anyone make reference of? I mean, I kind of see her as maybe bordering on a nymphomaniac or just someone who is in need of
Yeah.
physical touch.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like, what was it that maybe each sister, like each of them does provide a different kind of comedic
Yeah.
slapstick, or I would say Kathy Najimy is more slapstick. Like you
Yeah.
said, Sarah Jessica Parker is more of like this physical, but she kind of
Yeah,
is a little
sexy Betty
ditzy but
Boop kind of
sexy. Yeah, yeah,
Marilyn
yeah.
Monroe sort
Exactly.
of
Yeah.
performance. You know, I think the whole thing that they sort of talked about a lot, like people who are more at the creative side, who are writing it, the writer and Dave Kirshner talked about sort of like this idea that they were, you know, the female Three Stooges. And I think when you think of it that way, right, you're like the Three
Mm.
Stooges, they're all sort of their own brand of this kind of comedy. And I think you're right. It's like each of them sort of has their little bit where you know where they fall in the comedic scale. And like you said, it's like, yes, I think of Kathy Najimy being a little, she's the dim-witted one who's
Mm.
a little more like the physicality is kind of silly and like kind of like you know, she's going to be falling down and then things like that. And then like you said, you have sort of the more sexy version. I think that was, you know, the main description of Sarah's character is like, oh, she's the sexy sister. So everyone who seems to be interested, the bus driver, all these people, they're very interested in the way she looks, and she very much plays it up, and it's very much her, she's twirling her hair and she's moving very daintily. And you know, I think like you said, that sort of like it's a certain kind of comedy in its own, which is kind of funny in a kids movie because it's like a little more, like you said, like overtly sexual comedy style. And then you sort of have, you know, Bette being the one in charge. And I think like when you think of it as, yeah, the Three Stooges, you can see where each of them is like a Three Stooges, like they took one of the Stooges. So I do think they, like all of them tried to find, and I think that was probably important to the actors, right? To like have their own brand of comedy so that they stand out. It wasn't just Winnie and the girls. They're all three very unique versions. They look very different. They have their own unique, you know, body, the way they move. But I also think they move so well together. Like there very much is the obviously their little shuffle that we all love. But it's so, again, I think it goes back to like the sort of choreographed rhythmic directing, like from Kenny Ortega, that it's all very dancer. It's all very like, even
Mm.
the way we were talking about Sarah moves, like she moves very balletic. It's very like very sweet, and
Mm.
she's doing a lot of rocking back and forth. I feel like it's very childlike. So I feel like all
Mm.
of them sort of took a different. I know like the choreographer who worked on the movie talked about how there was a lot of like them training for this, like sort of working together and getting that silhouette, that sort of silhouette that we know of the three of them, where you can sort of see their hair and it's very much, you know, which one's which. That they sort of worked on that, and that was like part of how they thought about this, that they were unique three characters, but they were also a unit, and that they did like work on moving together and work on sort of how they would fill the space together. So I do think there's something really special about it because, like you said, they're all really unique, but they really work well together too. And I think that's like a testament to them because they all could have tried to do their own thing and stand out. But I think the movie is served by them choosing to be more of a unit.
And that makes sense because they're a coven. Like they
Yeah.
are a
Yeah.
group, they're a sisterhood. Now with Hocus Pocus 2. And I feel like you, Shannon, are definitely the person to clear up rumors. Or my husband has like a lot of speculation about
Oh,
apparently Thora Birch was going to be part of Hocus Pocus 2. Is that true? And she was
that
going to
is
be
true.
like her daughter was going to be a character, or
So
yeah.
the version, so I will say, there is not a chapter about Hocus Pocus 2 in my book. I did research and report out and did write a chapter. It just didn't feel quite right for this book. So I hope at some point, whether it's me or someone else, will write something about it because it's a really interesting story, obviously, about how long it took and why it took so long and everything. The thing that I had heard from Thora and from those involved with the writing process was that she was slated to be in the movie, but she was going to be like a teacher at the school, so she would sort of have a connection to the girls, but you know, she wouldn't be related to anyone. It would be more like she's there as sort of the wise, you know, she's been through this, she can help them. Um, there was a moment where I think she was going to be in it. And then I think scheduling other things wound up just, not working out. But, I've seen her more recently say, I'd love to be part of the third one. So I hope there's a way that like maybe they can bring some of her storyline that they sort of talked about in Hocus Pocus 2 to another movie or another way. Because I think we'd all love to see those characters return in some way, even if it's a silly kind of cameo. I think we'd all love to just sort of have them back in the mix.
Yeah. Is there anyone else from the cast who really wants to be involved in Hocus Pocus 3?
I think all of them,
Okay.
sounded like they would love to be a part of it. What that means, whether that's like a big role or very much, I think a lot of them sort of, when they would talk to me about it, were sort of pitching like, what if we just kind of show up in a scene, or what if we're, I think like, what if, Ice is like the janitor or something like, something that was kind of silly and fun. But I know that like, there is a sequel book, that like has a full story of like, Max and like his child is there, like that the child is part of it and they get pulled in and Thora Birch and Danny and they're all sort of they're Allison, like he's married to Allison and it's their child. And so I think there is like a version that could happen, but like they obviously strayed from the sequel book for the movie, and I don't know if they'll ever swerve back and go towards that. But there is a sequel book for those who actually are interested in maybe continuing the story of some of those characters. There is a sequel book that does have that story.
Well, and I know that Bette has been quoted recently, interviewed about Hocus Pocus 3, and she's ready. She's like,
Yeah.
give me the scripts. Like, I know that they all, Sarah Jessica Parker, Kathy Najimy, like if Bette says the word, they're back. Like,
Oh yeah.
they're all
love
going to
that
come back
for them,
Yeah.
that it's like we're coming together or we're not part of this. I've heard some rumblings that like, there is a script, and I've sort of heard a little bit about what it could be, but I've also heard there's maybe like a lot of iterations of it in case some people don't come back or people do. So I don't know exactly what they're planning. I mean, I kind of felt that the second one ended in a way that I don't need them to come back, because I think they sort of had their big ending, the Sanderson sisters. But obviously I don't think anyone's gonna say I don't want to see those three on screen together. But I feel like for me, I was like, I kind of like this. I wouldn't mind if they really have to do something with the Hocus Pocus cinematic universe. I wouldn't mind more of a prequel, because I loved the girls that played young
Yes,
Winnie, and
that was
I
so
would love
good.
something with them, or even if there's just more flashbacks in this new one, because I thought they were really great, and I thought that was such a fun way to sort of cover the Sanderson sisters. So I hope that they would be involved in some way. I don't know if that's what will happen, but I feel like either do a whole thing set in the prequel, or maybe just at least have some flashbacks, because I think a lot of people felt like me, like that was some of the most fun stuff, was seeing them young.
Yeah, that was so well done. And
Yeah.
Hannah Waddingham, I like her as an actress.
Yeah.
But something else, I know that this is a pie in the sky, but instead of, if their third one, isn't necessarily, I'm sure it is going, I have a feeling it's going to happen because the fans are really eager.
Yeah.
But like, I know that there was talks of maybe doing a Broadway musical. Did that like
Yeah.
die down, or is that still kind of in the ether?
Welcome to Severed, a podcast suite dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed True Crime and Severed Paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. A 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers, that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at severed_podcast.
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA plus people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.